Let's talk about the shortcomings of Reconstruction. Let's start with sharecropping. Sharecropping is what many African Americans turn to earn a living immediately after emancipation. Sharecropping is when someone farms someone else's land, and as a result, you get a share of the crop. Here's how it works, and here's why it's problematic. The sharecropper is given land and seed from the owner. In exchange, he promises to give half of the crop to the owner. But the sharecropper is in need of food. The sharecropper is in need of clothing. And they buy these things on credit from the landowner. They harvest the crop. They give the crop to the owner to sell. But the landowner comes back and tells the sharecropper, hey, that didn't sell for enough money. You still owe me more money. And as a result, to pay the debt, the sharecropper must promise the landowner that they'll work for him again next year and give him a larger chunk of money the following year. It puts them in debt, and it ties them to that land. It ties them to that owner. It leads to a loss of freedom. Why did African Americans choose to do this? Well, they were simply choosing to stay with what they knew, farming. They were choosing to stay with where they were from, the Deep South. And many of them were choosing something that would help their family. Sharecropping allowed mothers to work at the home and stay near their children and thus keep the family unit stronger. Why don't we see significant political change as a result of Reconstruction? We've already talked about the Compromise of 1877 and how the pulling out of Union troops from the South effectively ends Reconstruction. Well, as the Union troops leave and Republicans start to find their hold on the governments in the South slipping, Democrats regain control of the Southern state governments. And the governments that they create are called Redeemer governments. The Redeemer governments is the name for the Southern state governments throughout the South immediately after Reconstruction. And they vary a great deal, but they agree on two important principles. One, white supremacy, and two, laissez faire economic policy. In other words, the government stays out of the economy as much as possible. In the Redeemer governments, the state government had little to no regulation. And this is good for business owners, but it's bad for workers because it means bad working environments, dangerous working environments. It's also bad for farmers because government's not going to do anything to support farmers, and it's hard for farmers to get loans with little regulation over the banking industry. Redeemer governments also believed in white supremacy. The Democrats at this time were often referred to as the white man's party. And they blamed Reconstruction and the problems of Reconstruction on African Americans and Republican sympathizers gaining political power in the South. The Redeemer governments are very ineffective. For one, not just black farmers, but many white farmers are forced to turn to sharecropping. They ignore the problems of small farmers, and as a result, they are forced to turn to sharecropping or what's known as the crop lien system, which is very similar. It's where you borrow money based on a future harvest. Both of these lead to the same thing, debt. Both of these lead to sharecroppers being in hard economic times. The Redeemer governments also took money away from education. And what that means is that the South, by and large, is going to be forced to stay agrarian because of the lower level of education. Another reason for the lack of political change are the black codes that are passed in the South. In many southern states, these were laws that were simply the old slave codes, just with the word slave replaced with the word Negro. And what they effectively did was kept African Americans as second-class citizens. They really limited the rights that African Americans had. Why wasn't there significant cultural or ideological change in the South as a result of Reconstruction? Well, remember, African Americans had been informally segregated in the South via public pressure. And in fact, they'll remain segregated in the North for this reason, public pressure and public perception. However, in the South, segregation became part of the law. It became institutionalized with the passage of what were called Jim Crow laws. These were the laws that kept Southern society segregated. And while people remain segregated, there's no chance for prejudices and there's no chance for misconceptions to be erased. And racism simply continues as people continue to lead mainly segregated lives. Another reason for the lack of change was religion. Now, religion had been a powerful factor for the abolitionists, and religion was a powerful motivating factor, obviously, for the missionaries that went south during Reconstruction to help African Americans and others. But religion also worked in other ways. Remember when we talked about how the Protestant sects like Baptists and Methodists split over the issues of the Civil War and became northern and southern halves? Well, after the war, during Reconstruction, the two halves of the country, religion had been a powerful factor for abolitionists, and it had also been a powerful factor, obviously, for missionaries going south during Reconstruction to help African Americans and others. But religion worked in other ways as well. Remember when we talked about how prior to the Civil War, the Protestant sects like the Baptists and the Methodists divided into northern and southern parts? Well, during Reconstruction, after the Civil War, those two halves are going to try to reunite. Protestant sects are going to try to reconcile and bring their church back together into a national organization. And as a result, many religious leaders valued white unity over racial equality. Best example of this was Henry Ward Beecher, a prominent New York minister. And here's a minister from New York whose sister wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. Henry Ward Beecher supported the planters overseeing Reconstruction, not federal authorities, not African Americans, but the white aristocratic, formerly slave-owning planters overseeing Reconstruction. It's the best example of religious leaders valuing white unity over racial equality during Reconstruction.